Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the Center for Latin American Studies. This is the class speaker series. That's the last one of the semester. So the last class speaker series. This is an opportunity for us to discuss things related to Latin America, to host our new professors and the wonderful visiting scholars that come here and pass by. So today we have the huge luck to welcome my great friend and wonderful colleague, Regina Duarte. Regina is one of the main specialists on environmental history in Brazil, a professor of history at Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais, and among many other works, she is the author of Activist Biology, the National Museum, Politics and Nation Building in Brazil, which is available for download. Yes. So we can access. Yes. Regina will talk about activism and environmental history, or engaging audiences through making of the internet. And we're even luckier to have with Regina Professor Luiz Cedrez, who is right here, and will also, I couldn't make this joint a round table, but I invited Liz to also join in the conversation. Liz is a professor of history at the Universidade Federal do Rio de Janeiro.
You're much better off only with Regina.
Also works with environmental history and is the author of numerous works on Guanabara. Okay, so welcome, Regina.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
So, here's my water. So, thank you so much for coming, and thank you, Kayla, and all the staff, and for this opportunity to be with us and to discuss with us. So, environmental history engaging audience through filmmaking and the internet. Of course, I tested before. This is my talk is based in a chapter in this book, okay? And I co-authored with Bruna Pessoa. Okay, I will talk about her again. This our prize we won, and Dr. Lucas Erickson, environmental history in Brazil, and they allowed me to present the work. Okay, and I intend to discuss. Some topics: history as a transformative knowledge and a discursive practice. When we produce historical knowledge, we also make history. We are acting. Second, how environmental historians have been exploring the proximities and the distance between academic research, teaching, and activism. Third, how historians are expanding their tools and learning new skills to engage audiences. And to do this, I will focus on environmental history. And I will start returning half a century ago with some founding fathers of environmental history, which emerged as a new field study in the United States in the late 60s. And in 1970, Roderick Nash, the author of these books, gave a course entitled American Environmental History at the University of California to respond, I quote, to the cries for environmental responsibility and to help its Department of History to be more responsive to the problems of society. 15 years later, Richard White observed that environmental history, a very important author, had already emerged on the academic scene, deeply involved with, if not married to, modern environmentalism. And I found three texts, three giants of environmental history, writing in 1993 about this commitment. The first one is Donald Worster, emphasizing in his books that emphasizing the duty of environmental historians to offer ideas to the public instead of producing knowledge chasing its own tail. I don't agree with Donald Walton that before him, people were producing knowledge choosing. Think about Edward Thompson or Maria de Linhares. I don't agree with him, but he alleged that historians should try to take part in the great public issues that animate our times. Walster has cultivated political activism and engagement by environmental historians since his first works. And on the other hand, he has always emphasized that the environmental history field developed into a scholarly enterprise that had neither any simple nor any single moral or political agenda to promote. Another giant of environmental history, Martin Melusi, in 1993, wrote detailing the relationship between public and environmental history. And he stated that environmental history was born in advocacy. He argued for the need to find a consistent path to reach the policy community or to address many people within the environmental movement itself successfully. For him, environmental history is more than a new area of study. It's a mode of thinking. Menelozzi proposed to cast a larger net by disseminating results to a broader public. When doing this, the attentive use of historical methods was the key to bypassing bias or simplistic views. And the third author, the third giant of environmental history, William Cronon, evaluated that many, if not most, environmental historians aspire to contribute to contemporary environmental politics. And to this end, they must broaden the audience to historians of other fields, professionals of different disciplines, policymakers, activists, and ordinary people. There are obstacles in doing this, such as preserving the rigors of historical methods, resisting the seduction of power, and evading moral expectation to find clear heroes of violence. Environmental history could be an antidote to naive assumptions, decontextualized arguments, excessive generalizations, and plain old-fashioned wishful thinking. When presented the question, what's the history? And he is an enthusiastic defender of history and the power of narrative, the historian reminds everybody of the complexity and unpredictability of history and nature. So, as you can note, defining the boundaries between activism and academic work is not a simple task for an environmental history or for any historian. On one side, we know that history is written by people who are entangled in their contemporary crossroads. On the other hand, there is no magic recipe to explore this path. It requires significant theoretical discussions, implies methodological challenges, and raises ethical questions about the role of historical knowledge. Immersed in this dilemma, environmental historians have explored several possibilities to cast a wider net beyond traditional academic limits, and they risk themselves blending research, education, and activism. Many historians also want to be something like public intellectuals, and they are eager to trespass academic walls. The writings of Walster, Melusi, and Cronon I presented date from 1993, the same year the internet became available for general use. The internet exploded in the following years and changed the world, revolutionizing people's daily lives. It seems that Walster, Melusi, and Cronon felt something new in the air, prospecting its possibilities for historians. These new possibilities became increasingly visible for all of us in the following years. And I will tell you my personal experience, because I remember an afternoon around 2010, and I entered my son's room, Manuel, who was about 40 years old, and I noticed that the computer was broadcasting a show in which three younger speakers were discussing a historical topic. I stopped listening, observed my son, who was very interested, and asked him, "Is this a radio program?" And he explained, "No, Mom, it's a podcast." And he invited me to sit on the bed and listen to the podcast, to the episode for almost an hour. And he confessed to me that he could learn history better this way than at school. I noticed a significant difference from the traditional radio. The podcast is available online. It can be accessed anytime and any place in the world by anyone with digital access. That event 3 years later inspired me to inaugurate a weekly radio show with short 5-6 minute episodes. And the episode explored themes from environmental history and were broadcasted by the Educational Radio Study at my university, the Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais. I also created an educational YouTube channel to host the episodes. And while making 101 episodes, I always had in mind an audience like my son, my mother, who had grown up listening to the radio, and my former students who now work as school teachers and could use the episodes very short to introduce environmental history in their classes. In 2018, I met Bruna, that girl, okay? A young and talented visual artist, and he was a history undergraduate student at that time. And we decided to explore film language to address environmental issues. We have no funds, but we went ahead anyway, filming scenes with a non-professional camera, searching for old movies or photos in historical archives, editing all the materials in our laptop, and looking for copyright-free pieces of music. We produced 2 short documentaries about zoos and about urban animals. And these were exhibited at some festivals, and now they are available on YouTube. These are very modest initiatives, very modest in Bruno. They illustrate how environmental historians have embraced filmmaking and online platforms as dynamic and experimental media to reach a range of audiences while aiming for political or social change, assuming the transformative potential of researching and teaching, bursting the academic bubble. Historians not only want to understand the present as it is, like some book says, we will understand the past, we will understand the present. No. And I will quote Cornelius Castoriadis, a philosopher that I love and very, 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 he loves history, okay? And he says that any historical elucidation we may attempt is finally an interested one. It is for us in the strong sense, for we are not here only to say what is, but to make be what is not. I like this. And all historians are trying to make what is not. It is undoubtedly challenging to define precisely what an activist in environmental history is. It's difficult. The rise of digital history and engagement with platforms and social media have been decisive in this process. And thanks to this address, I found a recent debate, okay, this Heather Green published about it's a debate, what's our role in environmental history and activism, and very, very interesting, okay. She recommended me, proposed by the Network in Canadian History and Environment, about scholarship informed and rooted in activism. And Heather says that, Heather defines it as the act of working to address inequalities and social injustice, to be performed inside and outside the academy. Inside the academy, it implies renewing teaching, removing hierarchical, academic, racial, socioeconomic, and gender barriers, and encouraging all scholars to engage with public platforms. Activism also demands breaking down walls and creating conversation, partnerships, and collaboration between academic researchers and the public. It involves making connections and bridging gaps inside and outside the academy. So environmental historians find new opportunities to interact with broader audience beyond writing books. I think the writing of history is very important. I'm not saying it's not, but we can do more than this. We can explore filmic language and orality and adapt our writing to the conciseness and clarity of communication on social networks. There are many practical obstacles. The risk of losing the historical contributions' uniqueness is considerable, potentially sacrificing the complexity and quality of the critique in an eagerness for greater public reach for like this. With many podcasts, films, and websites dedicated to environmental issues, historians should prove that they can contribute to this debate with a different, complex, insightful, and original approach. But we must learn how to do this. Most striving, one can ask if these efforts will result in the audience's effective engagement, far beyond mere information or fleeting entertainment. To what extent will this activism of environmental historians succeed in awakening practical actions and new attitudes toward the environment? Thinking that the concept and the historical object of nature are constructed both by non-discursive and discursive human practices, following Foucault, I propose that all environmental filmmaking and online platforms activities are already activism. These initiatives and their interactions outline a contested virtual territory since our contemporary world blends the real and the virtual. In this change in digital geographies, to use a term of MacLean, the creation of a modern real space is quite a political strategy of activism through the digital. It enables social movements and engagement that stem from, but are not limited to the more than real. After providing a brief panorama of environmental history, political and social commitments since its appearance in the 1970s, I will explore now filmmaking as activism and are profoundly connected to the politically engaged goals of environmental history. So I will show some pioneering experience by environmental historians in the last decade. Then I will trace some initiatives by online platforms in different countries and exploring the challenges and possibilities in these practices. Environmental historians have been developing new skills to undermine traditional views that divorce nature from society. So, filmmaking. In April 2016, a Colombian environmental historian, Claudia Leal, from the University of de Los Andes, visited the region of La Macarena to conduct field work on the history of forests and national parks in Colombia. It was a time of great hope in this country as the federal government was negotiating a peace treaty with the FARC guerrillas. The Tinigua National Park hosted the Macarenas Ecological Research Center, which the Universidade de Los Andes maintained. This camp housed several biologists and ecologists between 1986 and 2002, but the activities were interrupted by the resurgence of the guerrillas. Together with her research assistant, Pablo Mejia, Claudia decided to make a documentary. And they intended to offer the work as an argument for, in that context, for getting the Ecological Research Center back up, supporting peace building and environmental conservation. A small film production company and the university supported the initiative. It was produced with much effort and little money. The final product was Paradise Lost, Aurelias de Duda. There are two versions, 40 minutes, premiered in 2017 and now available on YouTube, hosted on the Universidade de Los Angeles channel. The connections among art, science, and activism attracted particular attention from Greg Mitchman, author of a foundational book for film enthusiastic environmental historians, Kill Nature, first published in 1999. Mitchman realized that wildlife films had been fueled by people's aspirations to get involved with animals, simultaneously nourishing tourism and profitable entertainment ventures in so-called natural environments. He also noted that wildlife films usually reinforce a pristine and mythical nature. Human presence and action are frequently expunged from the scene. However, arguing that the stories of people and wildlife are intertwined, Mitchman decided to explore surprising ways that matter in the lives of people and animals throughout the world. Since 2007, Mitchman set up the film festival Tales from Planet Earth at the Nelson Institute Center for Culture, History, and Environment to bring together people dedicated to environmental films and those from wildlife documentaries, putting them in conversation. And as a curator, he has been determined to connect environmental social justice to natural history, wildlife filmmaking. Working as an expert consultant on films, Mitchman decided to become a filmmaker when he was handling footage from a 1926 Harvard University-led expedition in Liberia at the request of the Firestone Company. And the collaborative work included a Liberian PhD candidate, Emmanuel Urey, who was studying at those years at the University of Wisconsin, Michigan. Mitchman, Urey, and an extensive team produced two documentaries. In the Shadow of Ebola, on 2013, and The Land Beneath Our Feet, 2016. Both films use cinematic language to empower Liberian voices. There is a scene in The Earth Under Our Feet, emblematic for this instance. In it, Emmanuel Urey visits his community in Liberia and shows the images, the films from the 1926 to their community. They exhibit the movies. And the camera alternates in this moment, its focus between the scenes of a ritual dance in 1926 by the community and the reaction of the assistants in nowadays assistants. And one of the old villages recognizes elements of their ancestral culture that Firestone, the action of Firestone, had destroyed. At this moment, the Liberians watching the documentary take the floor, talk about their memories, and reconstruct their identities and history in front of the film crew and in front of us, the film's audience. It's very interesting. In addition to interacting with local communities and decentralizing the construction of the historical narrative, the team worked to repatriate the images taken in Liberia in the 20s. This film decolonized visual culture, supporting the contemporary challenges of that African country, In addition to the exhibits in Liberia, there is a digital public history community sourcing website where the public can interact about engaging this work. So, mapping environmental historians in film production is not so simple. These two examples, okay? But firstly, it's tough to define precisely what an environmental history film is. The expectation has been to contest the concept of nature only as a wide, pristine reality. Vanguard tendencies mix society and the physical environment, the present and the past, alternative knowledge and expertise, conflicts, cultural and political movements. Secondly, historians work here in an entirely collaborative medium, unlike the humanities academic work at universities, where frequently they publish authored books and articles. And third, it's difficult because it is easy to find initiatives by professionals working in the global north, but assessing those in the global south is difficult. Finally, documentary film and videos on environmental issues have been booming in the 21st century in nomadic festivals with fluid boundaries. So it's difficult to find it. Festivals decentralize film production and circulation. Some are well structured and visible. When searching the internet, it's easy to find events held in more affluent countries in Europe, North America. Some events have great structure, significant sponsorship, and sophisticated and dynamic websites, but not all of them, okay? These are some of them. In the chapter, we locate more film festivals, okay? Festivals decentralize film production and circulation. Okay. Bruno and I was reading the first paragraph, sorry. Bruno and I could locate some festivals in countries in the global south. The Green Film Network promotes communication among 34 regular film festivals. This network distributes films, improves professional skills, and encourages new initiatives. And the ranges of members is varied, such as FINCA, Buenos Aires, since 2010, Borneo Eco Film Festival, in Malaysia, since 2011, Mostra Ecofalante de Cinema Ambiental, in São Paulo, Brazil, since 2012, Cinema Planeta, no México, since 2009, CNS Vatavaram, in Nova Delhi, since 2002, and Festival in Santander, Colombia. Outside this circuit, it's possible to find others on the internet, such as Green Screen Film Fest, Trinidad and Tobago, since 2012, and Festival International de Filmes de Environment, the Festival International de Filmes de Environment, in Morocco, since Chefchaouen, in Morocco, since 2011. In addition to the most popular festivals that can be found on the internet, there is a myriad of festivals and initiatives. These are not always easy to locate, and the explosion of documentary films and visual production on environmental themes in the 21st century certainly stems, among other factors, from the miniaturization of professional quality video production, technology, and by the expanding diversity of window of distribution. There are festivals and workshops on a sporadic basis organized in small towns and villages, isolated communities, indigenous communities, and they introduce practices to stimulate simple interactions and even with the rising of new talents. Participants are encouraged by the speakers to use their cell phones as cameras to express themselves and become filmmakers. As at these events, a polyphony of stories emerges. Visions of minorities and social movements occupy screen mounted in squares, schools, small cinemas, or theaters. These independent films can significantly impact small groups or single-issue community causes, as they highlight local conflicts, worldviews, and problems through their own members' eyes and create poetic and aesthetic images and sonorities that interpret and signify their daily lives and social identities. It would be a mistake to think these festivals are only giving voice to the minorities. Instead, these people can raise their voice, laying the foundations of an epistemological term. The increase of camera in actions establishes fertile grounds for contestation, with new seeds sprouting here and there, as in the spread of a guerrilla movement. Rapid mobility in the center in the space, and it strengthens those fighting for environment and social justice. Low-budget productions create a universe of unknown and hitherto, I don't know, huh? Hitherto science story, the pronunciation, sorry. They reaffirm cinema as a tool of activism, a war machine that undermines intellectual, social, and political hierarchies. A war machine is the concept of Deleuze, né? I forgot to, I was from Deleuze, the concept of the nomadic war machine, okay? So these nomadic festivals are like war machine. Cláudia Leal made a documentary at a time when promises of peace were made in her country after years of guerrilla violence. However, the guerrilla strategy could be helpful in a historical, social, environmental cinema as a metaphor, empowering different regions in their struggles. There is a rich terrain to be occupied. Historians and humanities researchers rarely appear at festivals, often restricting themselves to academic events. There is much ground to cover if environmental historians are determined to reach new audience. Okay, so I'm going to the internet. It implies, né? There is a gap. We cannot think that it's an asexual place or democratic place. It's far from being a fair and democratic place, the internet. And it implies the gap. There are deliberate shutdowns promoted by authoritarian governments. Some countries have limited access to electricity, especially in Africa. Rural populations have less access also, but it has been an essential place for historians to reach broader audience and a place for us to come. And I will give some examples. This is Marciano Digital, a blog from Guilherme Castro from Panama, whose title honors the Cuban writer and activist José Martí. And Guilherme Castro is a founding member of the Latin American Society for Environmental History, the SOLCHA, and he has been publishing the blog since 2013, and he offers an intellectual production that is itself an activism. Castro mixes environmental history, political ecology, ecological economics, argues that Latin American environmental history is unique in its struggle for social justice. Another blogger is from the University of Delhi in India, Vipul Singh, and the blogger is Speaking History, this one, and has educational purpose, presenting history as essential knowledge to think about the contemporary problems and to be used as a guideline for the future. He has been publishing regularly since 2018, offering book reviews, announcements of workshops and conferences, texts on several themes in English and Hindi, and links for online talks about his research on the Ganges River, environmental history. And interestingly, Singh participated as a screenwriter and director in the documentary Printmaking the Gangetic Basis, approaching landscape transformation, embankment, floods, poor labor conditions, and urban construction. Crowdsourcing initiatives benefit the circulation of knowledge and the democratic spread of information. And one example is the online library of environmental history, edited by Lise Cedrez, Ana Marcela França, Ayelen Vichy, and Natasha Otoya. It's available in English, in Portuguese, in Spanish, and offers a database on Zotero, an open source search tool. It was first launched in 1999, and now it is hosted at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro website in Brazil, and is one of the initiatives of social. And Liz is also a founding member. Okay, several researchers, laboratories, and societies maintain YouTube channels with interview, courses, seminars, and environmental history. Lutz Global here is from a Brazilian professor, Helenita Malta, and discusses the history of environmental activism in Brazil. Lutz was a very important activist. And there is another by Satyaprita Raut from India, and UJC19HS13, this is the name of the website, and offers 108 videos on themes such as the environmental history of India, environmental injustice, climate, water governance, and others. And there is, since 2014, an African network of environmental humanities in Nigeria to facilitate communication among African researchers and circulating information on meetings, publications, and new initiatives. And other more, how I say, from North global countries, more with more funds, okay? Like the networks built by leading Global North, Networking Canadian History and Environment, the American Society for Environmental History, the Australian and New Zealand Environmental History Network, and the Rachel Castle Center for Environment and Society. More than establish a place on the internet, these groups seek to multiply connections by engaging the audience, always looking forward to attract more visitors, more followers, and interlocutors. The Network of Canadian History website offers open access to edited collections, book reviews, and posts under Canada's Anthropocene. The YouTube channel has over 100 videos with lectures, conversations, and lives. There is a podcast, Natural Pests, with interviews, lectures, roundtable discussions. There is a programming history which offers tutorials for historians to develop digital skills to create websites, blogs, databases, and better explore geographic information system and digital archives. And the Rachel Castle Center, which is here, here, okay, a non-profit institution founded in 2009 and linked to the Munich Ludwig Maximilian University, offers this portal. It's great, the Environment and Society portal. The portal opens exciting possibilities for exploration, knowledge, and experience with more than 1 million users. It publishes peer-reviewed journals. It also hosts virtual exhibitions, put digitalized material available. There is a multimedia library, brings vital and valuable documents. The Archival Gems is a growing collection of digitalized images, arts, and graphics, combines contemporary and historical environmental art, as well as comics and illustrations, books and profiles, full text books available, and other collections gather documents from environmental movements, articles from academic periodicals, and links to other environmental websites, blogs, networks, collaborations. Sound and Vision is another possibility, showcases audiovisual content on the human-environment relationships. All these materials are searchable by exploration tools. There is a map viewer exploration tool, opens a world map where the user can click the multi-map pin indicators in countries in all continents And this map viewer explorations tool reveals the unique features of the Racial Castle Centers, whose mission is related to education, research, and international cooperation. It's a very international institution. In addition to the internet activities, there is a scholarship program and attracts and welcomes people from all the countries, different ethnicities, genders, and countries. In 2011, Stefania Gallini was one of the organizers of a digital, she was working at the Universidade de Colômbia, Nacional de Colômbia, and she organized this virtual exhibition, she's from Socha, about a history of water in the 20th century Bogotá. It's a wonderful digital exposition. In March 2022, the project Occupy Climate Change, here it's the smallest, but not the very important, okay? Launched the virtual and growing Atlas of Other Worlds. Among the researchers engaged, some leading environmental historians like Marco Miero, Lise Cedrez, and Roberta Biasi. The Atlas highlights cases, studies of organizations and initiatives in cities around the globe, highlighting diverse, dynamic, and self-organized response to loss and damages caused by climate change. It offers inspiring stories such as Let the Onça drink clean water, deixa a onça beber água in my city, okay? And a million wells for Bengaluru, both social environmental movements in the city, the first in Belo Horizonte and this one in Bengaluru in India, and others. Lisa can talk more about it. And this project, the Occupy Climate Change, aims to ignite an imaginative exploration to the future, asking people also to write about how would the place where we live look like in the year 2022, how I say, 2022? 2200. 2200, okay? And these narratives are available and at the platform. They are very interesting because, for example, the historian Nicholas Cuvey writes about Quito, Bruno Bendito about the Namibian village Onangolo, and Hannah Erickson about Stockholm. And this project also intends to be a global activist network with academic initiatives such as publishing books and articles, delivering conference presentations, academic teaching. But however, the project also focuses on activities outside the academy, such as popular press article, public engagements, such as the Crosscut Film Festivals, workshops. And Marco Miero organized in 2020 events on decolonizing political ecology in Venice, Italy. Even considering all these valuable endeavors, when using the internet as a knowledge production tool, we must always think how to mine the gap. The gap has profound historical, political, social roots, and the big challenge is to create a bridge for all to cross. Here is another initiative of the Academy and Activities Network by the Center for World Environmental History at the University of Sussex, and is currently led by Vinita Damodaran, a historian of modern India and an enthusiastic advocate of the intimate relationship between environmental history, environmental policy, environmental activism, and environmental justice. And the first meeting of the Academy and Activists Network was in September 2014, bringing together people from different parts of the world. And they organized a workshop using social media for mobilization. And the Academy and Activists Network maintains a blog, a Twitter account. I don't know if they maintain the Twitter account, okay? A regular newsletter, online photo gallery, and open online seminars. In Vinita Damodaran words, The issue is that we cannot put activists in one silo and academics in other silos. So we have to break the silo. And concluding, this talk considered the promises and paradoxes in scholarly environmental history and activism dialogues. I assume that writing history is already activism when thought and action come together, and historians have long cultivated this practice. Think about Mark Bloch. Okay? However, environmental history is a practice other than activism. Otherwise, it may lose its original contribution. To dialogue, we have to have two views. To face this impasse, we must build an in-between place where historians and activists meet and contribute to each other in a dynamic and transformative way in time and space. Historians and activists need to communicate with each other and learn with each other. And sometimes the activists and the historians are in the same person, so we have to put them in conversation. And we also face the immense difficulty of reflecting. There is the book of, I was sure that I put the cover. We also face the difficulty of reflecting on the shifting realities of the internet in filmmaking by historians and scholars awakening to activism. Things are changing vertiginously in a world where the limits between the real and the virtual are blurring. Moreover, it's not just about using new technologies or just only acquiring new skills. All these actions occur in a world of profound political and social inequalities. Thus, no effort will result without facing the prevailing development model and social injustice. History is a transformative knowledge, and all historians must constantly renew themselves and their methods. In a time of social ecological crisis, filmmaking and the internet are more than tools for activism. They can be, using Deleuze and Guattari, they can be war machines. To explore all these possibilities, environmental historians must develop new skills. They should work with different professionals. We have to find them, to know with them. We need to trespass academic territories and disciplinary boundaries. And nowadays, historians are risking themselves through digital spaces, films and documentaries, podcasts, blogs, social media, and developing new skills. They strive to explore the porosity between academic knowledge and activism, facing up to decisive social, environmental, contemporary challenges. Adapting to the existing paths will not be enough, since we are treading in extraordinary, fluid, and changing soil. Years ago, we could not have imagined today's social media and technologies and all the possibilities for historical practice. Maybe you not, but me, that I am a 61-year-old woman, it was unimaginable. It was very difficult to imagine this world. The future will likely be just as surprising, and there isn't any ready-made script for us. For 21st century historians, it remains to explore the intersections between historical research and teaching, activism, film language, new technologies, the technology that we can imagine now, and social media with imagination, creativity, and boldness. These are times of fluid global context of environmental challenges, social inequalities, inside and outside academics, between races, genders, classes, and age groups. And in this entangled scene that historians have been reinventing themselves. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Regina. We have time for questions. I have some, if no one wants to ask the first question. I think this is so interesting, the ways in which you talk about the field as a whole and how it was developing. And and I have several things that I was thinking about, but one is, and maybe for Lizzie too, what is the place of Brazil in that discussion? In the sense that, in one hand, Brazil is such an important place for environmental studies in general, and also at the same time, I think an important place for the development of public history too. But it's part of the global south, which is not, it doesn't have the same conditions of producing knowledge, because of all the inequalities that you mentioned, including language, which is one that I think it's very crucial for that. So just wondering if you could talk a little bit about this connection between what is the Brazilian space and connection, and how it interacts, especially in this north-south discussion
of history, right?
Yes, but in history and in any specific environmental history.
I think Brazilian Academy was wake up more internalization for the last 20 years only. And the language is a barrier because most of our undergraduate students don't speak English. The funds are very little. We have little funds. But I think that Brazilian historiography is very original, and public history and the involvement of the historians in public issues and activism has a tradition in Brazil. For example, when I was thinking about how I disagree with Donald Wolster, I thought about some historians, and I thought about a Brazilian historian, Maria Ieda Linhares, who studied at Sorbonne with Brodel, and she was arrested during the military camp for her activities, for their thinking, for their writings. And she was a brave woman, a very important woman. And so I think we have a tradition of very original thinking, very linked to the problems of society, like Sérgio Arco de Holanda, thinking about our political culture, our values in the homem cordial, or Caio Prado Júnior, an activist of the Communist Party. And so we have a long tradition of activism in Brazilian history. And of women, important, Cátia Matoso, Maria Odida. So I think not only the environmental historians that is raising in Brazil for the last 20 years.
May I?
Yes, I would love
you to thank you so much for the lecture. And it made me think a number of different things, which is the sign of great lectures. But there are some parts also that I would like to provoke. One is when you're doing this kind of a genealogy of environmental history and environment activists together, the wonderful sentence by Richard White when they were married. And I was thinking that activist was, if activist was married to environmental history, it was a polygamous marriage, because in the 1960s, activism was married to gender history, to Afro-Latin history, and so on. And so many of these dilemmas could easily be applied to slave historians and slave historians. The studies of Native American studies, again with D. Brown and everything, is the same period and the same kind of concern, of active in the world. So there's and so my first question for you is, what makes environmental history different from these other things, these other marriages? But just to the one that I want to get, I totally agree with you that the Brazilian academia is very creative. We have to be, otherwise we wouldn't survive. And Brazilians are extremely active in the internet. I mean, just to use during a certain very small period of time, one of the justices of the Supreme Court closed Twitter. I refuse to call it X in Brazil, and the internet became a very difficult place when Brazilians could not access X. It was darker, uglier, because the presence of it's massive. Since Orkut was really huge in the social networks. I think that Brazilian academia has been very slow in tapping this particular resource. We are still seeing, there are some very good experiences that you mentioned to you, but it's still something that could be worked. You were a pioneer with the Quatro Estações, it's great, but there are a number of practical issues, how lack of money is one of them. Those websites cost money, and we are not trained to do that. Cannot be trained to do. You have to hire experts to do that. The Occupy Climate Change costs
a lot,
and it didn't work well because when the money finished, there's no way to update that website because we don't know how, we don't have the skills. So what? I agree with you that is a huge, that Brazilians are very creative, the Brazilian academy is very creative, but I see a number of institutions as hindrances, obstacles. I mean, among other things, we are not, as professors, we are not encouraged to take these things because it doesn't count towards tenure, for instance, the equivalent to tenure.
It doesn't count here either.
Yeah, and this is a problem. I mean, you did that. When you started 4 seasons, you were already a titular professor at the UFMG, right?
Yes, 2013.
It's a younger professor will think twice instead of working towards their books and other things. So there's, but anyway, we can keep talking about, because in some senses it's very similar to what I see in the American academia, the US academia as well.
I have a question. I think that you have this relationship with this question. When we research about race, gender, many times we receive questions if is activism or research. I already listen. You is a militant, not a professor in the university. Then I think that is maybe relationship with this question. If you receive criticism about this research, because when we present this relationship between the research and the activism, many times it's like a bad thing in the university. How is it there?
In Brazil?
Yes.
I think that we will try to tackle both questions. I think I don't know exactly what environmental history is different from the others in activism, and I think probably it's equal. It's the same. But I tackle this area because it's my area. But I think that slavery studies in Brazil are very important. And they were, how I say, also they appeared at the same time of the Black movement rights. Or, for example, the labor movements in the 80s and all the historiography in Brazil about anarchism and social movements in the beginning of the century. I think that the historians, they sometimes you can think about Greeks, the ancient Greeks, and you are a very important present to your contemporary debate. Yes. But some are more explicit, and environmental history is very explicit because we are facing a tragedy, a climate, okay? The end, the apocalypse.
That's actually a question that I had, because you talk about the shifting reality of the internet, and it's true, it changes, but the environment, it changes
a lot,
much faster. So it's complicated matter that, it's true that, whatever we're working in the digital world is changing, and we are always running behind. But how can you face, especially thinking about public history that has such a big portion of its education, right? The shifting realities of the environment. I mean, say something. Is there something positive to say? Because
yes, it's so hard to find something positive. But trying to answer her question, I don't remember the name. Aline. I think that, for example, if you think in Brazilian historiography, you think about most historians very integrated in political action, in gender issues. For example, Durval Albuquerque just published a book on transgender issues, or João Reis about slavery and the social movements, and Keila and Evie Matos. The first, another experience with film language used by historians was when I received a present from Evie Matos, a documentary on Jongo, made by Abby and by Marcia Abreu, who was here. And the documentary was great. And at that time, I used to teach the first period of Brazilian history, Republic, the post-abolition period. And I always have, in that time, it was very difficult to reach the DVD. It was a DVD. I had one copy, but it was difficult to obtain. And so every semester, I exhibited the film for my students. And I remember once there was a student seated in this place, and he was a black man. And when the class finished, he looked at me and said, "Oh, I would love to have more classes like this class." I told Ed, okay? And so they are great historians, and they are committed to cultural manifestations, to these communities of quilombolas. And I don't know if nowadays somebody can be criticized in Brazilian academy for being committed. I don't think. I think that this image of the public historian is being more and more common. For example, Lívio Schwartz or Eloise Starling. Okay, Eloise Starling nowadays, when the Supreme Court is deciding about the judgment of the coup d'etat tentative, they quoted Eloise Starling's book. Okay, so I think it's Eloise Starling is organizing a great thing. Once a month, in the street, she organized her group organized a debate in Savassi, in the core of the city. And so they put all the chairs in the street. It's very beautiful. And so someone presents a book or something, and there is a debate in front of a library and in the street, open air, 6 o'clock. Okay, it's very nice. It's very nice. So, and for
where they organize, which city?
Sorry?
In which city?
Belo Horizonte.
Where is that?
Belo Horizonte is in Minas Gerais, okay? And Eloisa Starling works at the same university, Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais, and he studied Republic topics. She is a talent.
Brilliant. So it's like academics? And
yes.
Yes.
We don't have here.
Yeah, we
Should
could
we
have.
have?
Yeah, I mean,
Shirley Plaza
Yeah.
is just there.
where I would love that. I mean, I don't know if Pittsburgh weather. Yeah. Yes.
In the summer,
In the
because in
summer.
Belo Horizonte we have a lot of rain. So when it rains a lot, probably they enter the library.
Yeah.
But when it's good, the weather,
That's
they
very nice.
stay.
Yeah.
in
It's a great
place.
idea.
It's a great idea.
Yes.
And we can invite history department.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Hi, I would like to, maybe it would be like more of an opinion, but when you brought so many great examples in terms of initiatives and movie festivals and film festivals that were across the globe. Can you portray what happens in Brazil, for example? We have many Brazils, right?
Yes.
And it is a universe per se.
Mhm.
So then, can you scale down that connection, that global connection, and let us know what is happening in Brazil and how the different approaches or representatives or communicating, how the different regions, if they're communicating at all, if there's any approach that will respect some regions and kind of create a sort of a network in terms of documenting environmental history through media, films, and all of that. So how is the scenario within Brazil?
Yes, I think that the bigger initiative is called Vídeos nas Aldeias, okay, by anthropologists who are going to the communities, indigenous communities, and they carry equipments and they put cameras on the hands of the children. There are documentaries made by children, and some of them become filmmakers. Okay, there is a website, bilingual, a website, Vídeo nas Aldeias, and it has been spreading, okay, through other indigenous communities. Is a initiative founded by Petrobras, and I think it's a more articulated initiative. There are a lot of film festivals in every city, a lot of cities, but there is, for example, Bruna. Bruna was born in a city near Belo Horizonte, Betim, and she was very poor girl, and she learned how to deal with a camera in a film festival in the square of Betim, when people arrived with cameras and taught her. And so she entered the university after this, and now she just defended her master in Sorbonne in visual arts. She's a great girl. She's very young, and I learned a lot with her. So I think that this little, simple initiatives, they are not organized, they are more local. But they, for example, they transformed Bruna's life when they say that she could be a filmmaker using her iPhone. And an iPhone, everybody has an iPhone.
May I jump in?
Huh? Yes. Oh, yes.
Within the academia, however, I think that the COVID epidemic was a watershed that forced a number of scholars in university to learn new skills very fast, not very well, but very fast. And I think all of us were involved in some kind of YouTube talk and everything. And those skills have remained in some ways. So there's still an incentive to find cheap ways to organize. So my own lab now is meeting at least once a month online, other than the local personal thing. But this is still very much in the academia. There are some initiatives, however, that try to bridge this kind of gap And I think that the University of Federal Santa Catarina with Flávia Varela, which is the work on how to bring university to the Wikipedia. So they have a different way to train young professors and not so young professors like myself to write. And it's a new skill. It's not the same thing as writing to a book or an academic article. It's tough.
Yeah.
And get your students to do that. And in Brazil, at least, so many of these parts of the Wikipedia were taken over by a certain religious right. And so to get the universities to try to write something very reachable, Wikipedia is the first source for most of the high school teachers or so on. It's the first thing that school teachers look for when they start organizing activities. So the outreach is huge. So I think so many of these initiatives, as you said, they are not exactly connected, but they're also not unconnected. I mean, there's the virtual meeting of labs of environmental history. That's 5 editions already. It started with the COVID cheap way. We meet once a year. It's in my lab as well. We get different grad students presenting and representing each one lab. It's about 20 the last time, presenting their work. There's very many traditional systems like the Ampul, equivalent to AHA, that has a symposium on that. I still think that people working on Black history is way ahead of us. I was thinking about the blog of the seven Black historians. You're part of it, right?
Yeah.
And that was an incredible initiative. There is a discussion, and I think that it does answer a bit the question of Aline, how people can be rigorous historians and still have unashamedly embrace their own activism.
But I think there is another obstacle. For example, if you made a film on TikTok, how to drink a water on this cup, okay? 1 million, 2 millions of viewers, likes, because they pay for impulse. And when we do this, we don't pay for impulse. So we reach, for example, if 200 views or 300 views, it's very few. It's very difficult to reach a lot of people without impulsing. And we have educational channels, and so we don't pay for impulse. And so they are restricted. You work a lot to do an interview, and it will reach 2,000 views. But if you made a TikTok drinking water in a way, or I don't know, okay, you will reach 2,000 because you. So I think the internet it's better for bad things. Yeah. Okay. It's not a coincidence. It goes well with dirty things. Okay.
When we were talking about that, this, of course, the discussion about internet being democratic is something that we left behind.
It's not up for discussion anymore.
But that's one concrete problem that we are facing is of those platforms like YouTube being now directly associated with, let's say, the new government here in the US, which poses threats to the existence of these videos. So I spend another day just downloading lots of things, just because someday we'll wake up and they won't be there.
They shoot down.
Yeah, yes. They won't be there. So that's a kind of like something that, of course, we didn't anticipate. But it's when we think about those mass, ways that we can reach. So the course that we taught in the website has like so many views. I don't know how, but it got it because it got it it grew like there's one of the videos that has 11,000.
Yeah,
It's crazy. Yeah, but then it's going to go down. So because it's so we sort of got used and very fast with the pandemic, but then now we need to think about going back to our own educational views that do not have that many possibilities, but they will stay. So
But-
I don't know.
And we also need, as historians, to keep a history
Of
of
the
our
internet.
own trajectory. I wrote, and if you allow me to do some publicity, I wrote in 97 an article. I was a master's student about the use of internet for environmental history. And many things are old because the internet in 97 is not the internet in 2025. But one thing that I was discussing is the ephemerity. At that point, every time you build a website, it covers the previous writing of the website. It's a kind of palimpsestus when you cannot access the previous writing. And that was something that was concerning for me. And then in the Twin Towers attack, 2001, there was an initiative called the 9/11 Initiative that was trying to collect all the messages and reactions of people to 9/11 in one single depository. That was the beginning of a number of other depositories that shows different versions of websites, different websites that have disappeared and are no longer accessible. And this, I think that for historians, not only for environmental historians, but historians in general, is something that we have to think about. Because yes, you're right, we cannot depend on the platforms to keep the historical record. But what can we depend on that? Is there a Library of Congress that are keeping the volumes of bytes of websites that have disappeared? Alta Vista was the website that I was using when I was searching. Like, is it lost?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like we are going to find the lost letters of Shakespeare in a closet. Unless you are a hacker, you are not going to get in the computer of someone and find lost emails. And nobody's printing emails. Oliver North was one of the dumbest person around because he printed actual emails of the Iron Contrast thing, but nobody else does. At least I don't. So
I read my important.
You
I
do?
think we have time for one more
effective
question.
ones.
Yes. Paula, and then we'll be the last.
Yes, hi, Georgina, it's
Hi.
great to be here, and I try to do like a bridge of art history and environmental history in my work. So I was curious, you gave a very broad overview of the film festivals and the use of online, but I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about the actual, of course there's many, but like the films or the type of content online that has gotten more traction or has been more effective, and what is effective when we're thinking about online environmental history, online activism, film activism.
We know paper puppets.
Sure, in one way. Because my sense was it's mostly documentaries, but there's also films like Bacurau, that is a sci-fi dystopian view that also has environmental dimensions. And so I'm wondering, within this large media landscape, what do the actual films or online content look like that are most valuable and useful?
Yes, and I think this is a challenge for us because we are. I was trained to write academic language. Even I don't like it. It's very hard academic language. I never did this. But usually we were trained to do this, a lot of notes and talk a lot. And this kind of world, okay, of this kind of people who are looking for something in the internet, they want they are attracted by other kind of talk, more concise, more fast. But the challenge is to say few words words and with good content. And this is a challenge for us to be concise. And probably this explains also our difficulty to communicate with normal people by our ability. Why people didn't, when I think that I taught history for more than 30 years, I think what happened to these people, which I taught, because they were teachers, they became teachers for other people. Why people don't know history? Why they are so uninformed about history, so wrong about history, so easy to receive, how I say, lies. And so I think we made something wrong. And trying to communicate more effectively, for me, which was trained in these academic schools, okay, it's a challenge. But I think that the new generation will be able to do this.